This meeting is being recorded already. Okay, I think somebody else is recording.
Yeah, I think.
The
AI thing.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, we're going to go straight into the presentation, if that's all right. And as usual, please do ask me questions, all right? It's not, can you all see that?
Oh, yep, we can, yep.
I've made it, okay, got to go full screen now. I'm full screen. Is that good for you all?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay with me.
Okay, I can't see any chat. I'm just letting you know that. Oh, I can now. Good. Right, first slide, and that's the introduction to us all and who you are as advocates, okay? The Neurodivergent Advocate Leadership Programme, NALP. And I'm not aware of any other leadership programs like this, actually. So what we're going to cover in this session is what this program is about. So you can just remind yourselves by hearing the recording and looking at the slides later on. The next bit, which I found very interesting, and I was saying to the others that I think I'm becoming a bit of a nerd, is that actually I found the historical sociocultural context of leadership throughout the ages really interesting, because it really says a lot about our society and who we are now and what's happened to us as a society. So the bulk of the presentation is going to be about that, actually, because it informs the different types of leadership that we have now and have had in the past. And then we're going to have a bit of discussion about, if we've got time, about what we think leadership looks like now and how we would need to adjust and make changes to be an inclusive leader, because this is what really the program is all about. It's about inclusive leadership. Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Yep, no, that makes sense.
Great, good, we're starting well. This is just to recap so that you remind yourselves later on what this program is about. As we know, it's the National Lottery, and this actual recording will be really helpful to them, for them to remind themselves about what we are about. But the whole point about the programme is to raise awareness about the unique perspectives and attributes of neurodivergent adults and how we have so much to bring to effective leadership and how we can increase the understanding of this to our neuronormative, neurotypical, neuromajority colleagues, whatever you want to call ourselves and each other. And that we have actually unique perspectives. We actually contribute hugely to society in many different ways. And we are really effective as advocates for neurodivergent people. And this is actually the core of inclusive leadership. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Great stuff. Right, I'm just reminding you what we all agreed last time we all met, that these are the advocate training sessions, the dates and who's leading them. As I said, I'm very happy to set up the template of your sessions for you to input with me. But this is all about you demonstrating your leadership and your knowledge and your skills as an inclusive leader. Okay. And we are going through a whole range of perspectives to do with leadership, which amount to inclusive leadership. So, you were the ones who said all this at last time we met. So it actually makes you inclusive leaders already. Okay, because this is what it's all about. And part two, this is really exciting. Part two is sharing knowledge. Now, the National Lottery have funded us for this part two. And as I said earlier, it might be that we decide that we edit some of the recordings and piece some of the recordings together to circulate with you doing a live introduction some of you deciding who you will nominate for particular recordings to be sent out. And we do a seminar Zoom like that. And I think that actually might be a very good way to go, to be honest. What do you think?
Yeah, and that makes sense, because sometimes if we just did it as how it is now, who's going to want to listen to it all apart from us? So are you thinking more that when we record it like that, it's to go out on YouTube and the wider environment, whereas these ones are recorded more for us? Is that right? Have I got that? Am I correct in that understanding?
Not quite.
All right.
This session is very much for you, and it's your recording. The next sessions we will be recording, and you're involved as leaders delivering those sessions. Now, we might want to upload those to YouTube as private films, but we then look at them and think, well, actually, some of it is really, really good, and we piece them together and make a recording. Do you see? That can go out these particular months. So rather than reinventing the wheel completely, you will do introductions on Zoom, and then we flip to the recording.
Yeah, so basically like the old-fashioned, I'm a bit showing my age, but the old-fashioned when people used to cut like video editing, where you just take a little bit, and then like when they're doing films and everything. And I'm with you. I'm on the page. I'm there. Good,
thank you. And it just seemed to me makes sense to me, not to reinvent the wheel. You've all got a input into the editing. We don't send anything out that you don't approve as a set of advocates, and I think that's a really good way to go, actually. The May, I've made the face-to-face the final one because it has really exciting news today. The Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, the principal phoned me up today, and they host Achievability Journal. You all came to that launch at the Royal, and she's got research funding, and she's going to be doing a big event on neurodiversity at Senate House, which is a centre point for all of the colleges of the University of London. So she wants achievability to be part of that. And I think that we should piggyback onto that, where you can do a little session in that neurodiversity event on the 29th of May about the leadership programme. Okay, don't all look so dumbfounded.
I'm writing the date down, so I can, so I've got it. So is it 29th? I'm guessing. Is that day, evening, or do you not?
It's all day. It's all day on a Thursday in central London. I mean, I'm just flagging it up to you. We don't have to do it, but it's a really good opportunity, and I'm absolutely sure she would allow a small slot for you as advocates to just talk about your leadership programme. Now, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. We can go back to the other idea, which was to hire a room in the Workingmen's College in Camden, and you have your own very sort of event that's very much about you. It's up to you.
I think the first one seems better. If you're going to talk about leadership and we're going to be all, this is just my opinion, feel free everybody else to chip in, but I just think because I know I'm now feeling like I'm taking over, but I just think if we're going to do it, why wouldn't we want to spread the word a bit wider? And also we'll probably, I'm assuming because of what she's doing, there'll be other people, we'll probably get to mix with a lot more other people, so we might widen our circle a bit more.
Yes, you will.
Yeah, so to me, I think that's quite good. And then we can highlight what we're doing, and we'll probably be able to pick things up from other people, because that's pretty much how I learn most of my stuff, by having a chat, and then I learn more. So my vote is we mix with them, and I'm going to put it in my calendar. I mean, I've obviously had to start my new job, so I'm hoping I will be free, but I'll put it in as an holiday and let my boss know as soon as I can.
Okay, everybody okay with that? Because it's not just Becky.
I'm okay with that as well.
Andre?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah.
I'll say I kind of need to just see how the whole not the whole program, but quite a few things pan out with this to know how I would feel about that. But if everybody's kind of wants to go with, that idea, then I'll go with it. But I'm kind of a bit blank about things now. I just kind of need to see how things are going to come together first of all. Yeah.
Fair enough. But, now and again, you have to plan, but plans change. But it's always good to to try to do some planning. So we have an idea of what we're aiming for, but we know that it can change, okay? So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So, okay, that's great. Thank you all of you for your input. Right, we're going to go to funding now. £20 an hour, you've got 2 planning meetings. This is the total cost of 2 planning meetings for all advocates, 360. I'm being really transparent with you. Total costs. Right, training sessions, what's available each training session for all advocates is 360. It can be an hour, it can be an hour and a half. The advocate is helping to lead the session. That can be £80, depending on the funding, it could be a bit more actually. And, you know, £30 for each advocate attending if it's up to 1.5 hours. But, you know, we can be flexible depending on the funding available, you know. We might not have all our advocates attending, so therefore there'll be more money available. And of course, in part 2, there's 1,500 available. So, you know, we can also look at that. It might be that the face-to-face event is costed more because our Zoom sessions will cost it less. Okay then? Good. Right, we're going to go into the really interesting bit. Now, as I said, I just thought this was fascinating because the social cultural contexts of leadership are really, really important in terms of how we connect with each other. And recently, and very recently, I have to say, compassion, empathy are now being discussed as being really important attributes for leaders. And frankly, they were hardly mentioned in the past, and we will find out why in a minute. But honesty, integrity, and authenticity are still considered important. And I suppose that's why we are, you know, we're sort of becoming more and more disappointed in our politicians, actually, because they're clearly, you know, what's happening is they
You can't lay straight in bed, is what you're thinking, isn't it, really? Yeah, that's the first what jumps to mind.
Yeah, you know, I think people are generally disappointed, actually, because of, particularly during COVID, and you could see that the integrity and honesty of some politicians were highly suspect.
Funny politely. Yeah.
So, you know, I think that still resonates with society and people in general, that those are really important attributes of being a leader. And I suppose that leads to respect, doesn't it?
Mm.
You know, and I think actually that's what neurodivergent people do find very difficult is how can you follow a leader or be part of a leadership if you can't respect the person or the organization? Okay. I think neurodivergent people find that quite difficult. And that is why it is so good that compassion, empathy, honesty, and integrity are now emerging as being really key elements of leadership.
Can I ask a question? Do you think it is? Sorry.
Sorry.
Can I just ask a quick question on that one? Just when you were saying it, because I do find that really difficult when people aren't honest and doing the right thing, and I do seem to react much more harsher over that when I find like the injustice of things and when people aren't doing the right thing. It really bothers me compared to some of my colleagues who just sort of let it go. So do you think it is a neurodiversion thing? Because I do wonder, why am I so annoyed about the stuff that other people can just be like, well, you know, that's how it is, as if that's what makes it okay.
I think we have talked about this before, but quite a long time ago. And I generally think it is actually. And the reason for it is because on many levels, but one of the levels is that justice is really important to neurodivergent people because of the amounts of challenges that they have. And I think, you know, anybody who has had a challenge in their lives or a number of challenges, and that's why intersectionality is an important part of our language now, which looks at all the challenges that people have, whether it's race, gender, or being a neurodivergent. If you have a lot of challenges in life and you have actually managed to surmount them, justice, fairness, reasonable behavior become really important because that's how you can measure things effectively. Okay, people with less challenges possibly don't find that such an important area, but I'm saying that very generally. But in my work with neurodivergent people, and I've done a lot of work now, as you know, it really is important.
No, thank you. That's
To the
helpful.
point where people will dig their heels in massively, because there's a lot of patience in the neurodivergent world as well, in the neurodivergent community, because you learn patience. Because you either sink or swim, and if you want to be successful, you have to be patient in the end, and you deal with the challenges in a patient way. But there are lines to be crossed, and there are red lines. And that's where the fairness and the social justice, etc., integrity comes in. And I think, I've talked to the advocates a lot. I've talked to people a lot. We've talked a lot in the meetups. It comes up all the time that people have a red line, and that's that. And there's no going back. And that happens a lot with the neurodivergent community, I think.
That's good. That makes me feel a lot better, because I would say that is generally definitely me. And like I say, but I feel better that it's not just me. We're all like it mainly. So that, yes, I feel better, and that makes
Well,
it
how
clearer.
do other people feel about that conversation?
Yeah, I'd agree with it. I just get really annoyed if people aren't being honest, or they aren't doing things correctly. And I do tend to stand up for myself where I wouldn't have in the past. As I've got older, I kind of speak up. But if I've had bosses where I thought they weren't being fair, so I kind of lost a lot of respect for them. Yeah, I don't know what anybody else thinks.
Anybody else?
Mine is the inner work that I have developed, especially since these meetings. And it's so important because, in my opinion, I was living my life in a very unconscious way. And I'm not saying I'm conscious on everything, but I call out my faults as well. And I try to be better, even when I think, oh my God, this is happening to me or whatever. I try to go inwards and think, well, what did I do? Or, so I start from that first. And once I get the answer, if it is me, then I work on myself. If it's outside, then I think, oh no, well, that's when I make my decision to leave or to stay, or, yeah.
No. Anybody else want to chip in?
Miss Rosie, can I just ask about the chat? Is it all just AI operated? Because I don't seem to be able to put anything in there. Not that I want to right this second, but I just wanted to ask about it.
Well, it's out of my hands, it appears, Rose, because Maddie has got some sort of otter AI going on, which takes notes of what's being said.
Oh, okay.
Maddie, are you here with us, or are you just doing AI? Maddie?
I think she put something that she earlier on, something about
she's
mute,
here.
and then I clicked. So
Yeah,
I'm not
she's
sure
here.
she's
here.
there, but I
Yeah.
don't know if she can unmute. I don't know if that's affecting the AI, because she said something earlier on. I just
Right.
saw it pop up, something about I can't unmute. I think I saw that on one of the early chats, and
Yeah.
I thought, oh, are we all on mute? And then I tried, and I thought no, and then
Okay, I've just put I can access, so I can access the chat.
Right.
You should be
Okay.
able. You should be
Okay.
able to go into the chat.
Okay. All right. I just wasn't sure what was going on.
Yeah. I think the AI might just come in and disrupt it a bit now and again. Okay. Right. You're just going to have to keep going on the chat if you can. Right. So we've all agreed, in essence, that honesty and integrity is really important, not only to ourselves, and that's how we measure others. Yeah. Right, this is interesting. We're now going back in time. We've talked about what is happening now with us as the neurodivergent community, and actually how inclusive leadership is really important to us. That's the here and now. And that is why we want to spread the word, and that's why we want to actually disseminate what we're doing here, because it is quite cutting edge, actually, what we're doing, and that's why we got the money. But, you know, previously, for centuries, up to the 1950s, you've got this, and it's what's interesting, call it the great man theory. Doesn't say everything, you know. Let me just shut my door here. I've got various wandering around the house. That includes animals and people. Okay. I just thought this is absolutely fascinating. You know, Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Mussolini, and you could name quite a few who are lesser great man people, but you know, right up to the 1930s and 40s, you know, this was really prevalent. And it's about trait, or some people say trait, theories. And this is about the fact that you're born to lead. So that sort of begs a question about all the things to do with it, you know, culture, and begs a question about, you know, how we are brought up educationally, you know, and I dare I say it, class, and all those things, you know. So up to the 1940s, it was about, you know, the fact that you were born to lead, and it's embedded, it's characteristic that's caused by your genetics. You are the leadership class. So it's very interesting that, you know, by the 1940s, this all changes in the Second World War, because then, you know, the world becomes a bit more kind of open to socialist ideas. These are very general observations, okay, but particularly in the UK, this happened. And you get the welfare system, you get free education. It all becomes much more of a level playing field, okay? And what happens in society absolutely directly impacts on how we view our relationships and how we view the hierarchy of management and leadership, and how we conduct ourselves within the workplace or wherever. So, you know, this is actually consistent up to the 1940s, 1950s. And then social scientists and educationalists and various policymakers who inform our political and cultural systems recognised actually there was no consistent set. There was no consistent set. And actually, leaders kept popping up who weren't part of this leadership hierarchy. Okay. And they just had to accept it. So it was abandoned. But you still today, and this is why lots and lots of actually psychologists as well, and people who are thinkers in the neurodivergent community really don't like psychometric tools and psychometric testing in the workplace, okay? Because that still has elements of trait theory in it, still has elements within the root of how they form these psychometric tests and tools.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of social scientists absolutely hate them. And for instance, if you talk to Dr. Ross Cooper, who you know, who's a social scientist and a very, very eminent neurodivergent academic, he absolutely loathes them. And that's the reason for it, because they are not correct measurements. They are one fit for a particular type of person, all right? So it's a very interesting background here. And we very, very slowly edge our way over the decades to a more inclusive way of operating. But we have to go through the decades, and that's what we're going to do a bit now, because it gives you an idea of what then happens. So from over the 50s, you know, they start to look at behavioral theory, and that's certainly happening in the science area. You know, there was lots of experiments with animals, you know, and you know how you can actually instruct an animal to behave in a certain way, given the context and situation, right? You know, and science and education links heavily up together to inform each other in terms of research people and policymakers. So, you know, by this time they're saying, well, you know, people can have learnt behaviours. You can teach a leader to be a leader and be effective, but it still completely ignores all the other factors that go with our existence, such as situation and such as life experience. Okay, so they started to group these behaviors together, and they called them styles. So, you know, behavioral styles. And this even actually started to inform education, because we hear about learning styles, don't we? Later on, you know, particularly in the 60s. You know, all actually interconnects what's going on in research across science, arts, and humanities. So they start to label this as styles, and the behavior is very much still very hierarchical. It's about dominance, it's about the influential sphere, it's about being a steady leader, and it's about ensuring compliance of you as a leader to your people above, and compliance of people underneath you. So it's still very hierarchical, okay? And still today, this behavioural theory informs leadership training. So you can see how this is evolving, can't you? You can see that there are still some really bad practices going on in leadership training, where you have this very fixed psychometric tools, and you have this propensity towards behavioural situation, which is, you know, you could learn and teach somebody to behave in a certain way. All right. Are you with me?
Yep.
Right. Good. Right. We start to open up now. You know, we go into the 60s, and of course, you know, society is opening up. So it's all again, you know, influences each other. You know, we have the 60s, we have an incredible opening of society in terms of how we behave towards each other, our relationships. You know, women become, you know, in a slightly better place. Gender, you know, we're getting legalization of you know, of gay people. You know, it starts to open up. So this actually also informs situation. It's called a situational leadership. They're starting to realize it's not just about behavior. It's not that you actually are born to it. Actually, your leadership is in the context of your situation. And so they start to think about, well, leaders need to be placed in situations that best match their style. So we're still going back to the behavioral era, where we're looking at styles, but they're now starting to think, well, let's be a little bit more flexible about this, because you can't just have a leader who's particular to a style and, you know, put them anywhere. We need to think about the situation we put them in a political particular context. So, you know, it's very much about the situation now, as well as the style. Okay. But I mean, you know, they start to lead on, you know, we start to move forward, and we start to look much more at situational leadership and less about behavioural leadership. And it's about, you know, we start to get more flexible in leadership, where leaders need to assess things, you know. This is not didactic, which is actually very directional, of one mind. They start to see things in different perspectives, and they start to assess the context in which they would be operating. So we're now moving forward very quickly. You know, we have 30 years of this, you know, and actually within the 90s, we're starting to look at transactional leadership, which relies on authority still. We're still looking at very authoritarian situations. you know, to motivate employees. And what's actually very interesting, and this is just a by the by, when society gets to a position where it becomes very difficult to operate, for instance, around 2010, and we had that whole kind of financial meltdown, you find organizations and leaders become more transactional again and authoritarian to get things done and quickly. You could call them hatchet jobs, okay? And we certainly know about that, don't we? So, you know, when things get tough in society, people smartly move back to this transactional authoritarian leadership model. What's so interesting, actually, is, I mean, you saw through COVID, there was something of an authoritarian leadership model, you know, people being fined, etc., willy-nilly. It became, you know, but actually it wasn't so bad in the UK. Other European countries had it much worse than us in terms of authoritarian leadership and rules and regulations during COVID. What's so interesting, actually, is because since COVID, we've got this very, very much a hybrid situation and recognition that there's a flexible way of operating, a far more flexible way of operating. We're smartly going into inclusive leadership. But before that, when times were good, we did have what we would call transformational leadership, which is about motivating people to make changes in the organization. It's about inspiring. Okay, and that very much happened in the 2000s when technology became so important, and you had these technological gurus like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, where, you know, and many of them were neurodivergent, because it was about needing to keep up with the fast pace of a global society, because technology had made us global. So it very much about transformational leaders and the ability to change rapidly with the need. So, you know, you can see where I'm going with this. You know, leadership changes in terms of what happens to society. But we are gradually moving forward from very authoritarian situations to a much more transformational situation, which is about inspiring, and it's about including people much more. Is that okay with everybody?
Yep.
Great, thank you. I feel as I'm lecturing you.
Katherine, can I just ask, does this all come from sort of industrialization onwards? Because I remember reading history books at college that were all about matriarchies when women were revered and in charge of a lot of societies and cultures. And I'm very conscious that that doesn't get talked about much these days.
Well, I can tell you, thank you, Rose, for that question. Okay, that's a really interesting question. I think the Industrial Revolution was very much part of this, but actually James I was part of this.
Right.
Yeah, because before James I, Queen Elizabeth I, women had a fairly free role in society. They could operate businesses, they could, you know, own property to a certain extent, okay? And certainly, you know, you had Elizabeth I and, you know, Queen Mary as role models along the way. But, you know, James I came along and he unified Scotland and the UK. And he was incredibly punitive towards women. And it never really recovered until the 20th century.
When you say punitive, do you mean sexist? Is that what that word means? Just so I'm clear, punitive, does it mean sexist?
Oh, well, I suppose, yes, you could say it's sexist, but actually, you know, with James I, he rewrote the Bible, okay? So you've got the English version of the Bible with James I. And with that came the witch hunts. And women, you know, if they lived on their own, if they weren't married, or if they had any, you know, any individuality at all, they were hunted as witches. and it was really very bad. And it was actually worse than Scotland at times. So, you know, a lot was taken away from women at that point. And they became really subservient. And it still went on right up through to the Victorian time. There was a time actually during Queen Anne where it got a bit better for women, because, you know, Queen Anne was a bit of a role model as well. So there are moments in history where it gets better, but it never really recovers from the early days around, you know, the early Tudor times, well, during the Tudor times, until we get votes for women, you know, at the beginning of the last century. And even then, you know, it's within reason. You know, it's women who own property and who are over 25, or I think might have been over 30 at the time. So, you know, it has been genuinely punitive towards women. And that's why that big man theory is so interesting, because it reflects society's attitude.
Do we really
On
think that's changed though? Do we really think it's changed, or is there still more tokenism? Because even though there is some women in some organisations, a lot of people that still hold the power is still probably a small group of people, mainly men, in all these organisations. Even though they say we want more women, we want more women, but have they really got the power? And the influential women, and I don't know a lot about that, 'cause I wasn't never good at that sort of stuff, but a lot of the influential women that you see in history was only the ones normally who had a lot of money, so they came from money, they inherited money. I only know because I went to Florence Nightingale's museum a few years ago, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Then Beatrix Potter, then the other one. So I am using it from a very limited source, but it did seem that the only women who was really able to make actual noticeable change and get their voices listened to was because they had money. Anybody who didn't have money or come from the right sort of bloodline and things like that still didn't seem to get a say. It was only if they got money. Is that right?
Well, I think that to a certain extent it's right, Becky, and it's probably, you know, sadly, we might be going back to that stage because of, you know, the fact that there's such a wide gap between the poor and rich. But, you know, there are incidences where there are women who, you know, didn't have that much money. I mean, Barbara Castle, she was, you know, she was in the Labour Party during the 60s and 70s, and she was responsible for changes in law around solely responsible for changes in law around equal pay for women, you know. So, you know, there are these sort of light bulb moments in history where, you know, women have made a big change, but it is a tough call. And, you know, in general, they need to have men who are supportive of them, you know, or
This is just our culture, though, isn't it? It's not all over the world. There are still primitive cultures where this isn't the case, and where women
yeah, there are,
very
but
different.
you know, there aren't many of them, Rose. You know, if you look at the world, there are a few cultures where women are either equal or are, you know, leaders, but there are very, very few of them. I remember reading that there is a culture, Muslim culture, where women are actually equal and have equal say in divorce as well. But the problem there is that actually the men then aren't accountable for paying equally towards any children that are, you know, I mean, women constantly have had a difficult time. There's no doubt about that. And you have to be extremely good at what you do to be noticed or to actually get through the system. And I think that's still the case.
I think so, and I think you need a bit of luck, but also, like we were saying before, you need that luck, but you also, a lot of the time, you do need, because when we talk about advocacy and things like that, I found, particularly in a workplace, you don't just need advocacy from other women. You really need, and often you don't get it from other women. You really need it from the men, because only the men will listen to the other men. When a woman tries doing it, it seems very different, and what people say in a public forum, because I spend a lot of time at different events, what I see on when they stand up and do a talk or the literature they send round is often a very different conversation to when they're in a closed room when they think they can get away with it, or when they're in the bar in the evening and they've had quite a bit to drink. And then I think to myself, the issue you've got there is that is their true nature. So when they're interviewing or recruiting, who are they going to pick? If somebody walks in, are they going to pick a mirror image of themselves, a guy they can go to the pub with and have a beer, or are they going to pick somebody who doesn't look like them, who isn't the same as them, who well, we're not sure. So again, you're always on the back foot, aren't you, with things like that? That's how I see it. I think it is I think it is still incredibly hard, even though there's a lot of practices in place. If the person at the top doesn't share your views, it makes it very hard.
I agree completely with that. I also would make a caveat here is it depends on the industry to a certain extent, and it depends on where you're located. You know, there are some urban areas that are a bit better than other urban areas for this.
And it depends on education, what they've been educated at home and at school. I mean, the education system, it seems in some ways is getting better. In young men are much more. Some young men are really, really not like that at all these days.
But then you sort of hear about schools and this awful sexist situation that's going on towards girls in schools, you know. So, you know, you've got these areas of really bad behavior going on, and some areas where it's really doing, you know, very, very well. Again, it's about people, and you know, it's what Becky's saying. It's about the leadership at the top, and
I think men are suffering just as much. I don't think men want to be like this, most of them. I think some of them just don't know that there's any other way to be.
I think some don't question the behaviour though as well. I think some of it is a question. I mean, I'll just use an example because I am feeling a bit bitter at the moment as I'm changing jobs, because I've been trying to leave my job. Obviously, I've handed my notice in and leave. I've had to go through quite a tough couple of weeks with handing my notice in because they don't want me to leave, right? But then and I says, but why are you treating me in a different way? Two guys, my boss who they promoted twice above me, and this other guy, and they both left, no issues, no meetings, didn't do anything for the last couple of weeks, and I've had 2 late evening phone calls with one of the directors, and I said, why are you making it so difficult for me? I says, they didn't have any of this. Well, they were crap at their job, you're not, we don't want you to go, but you're going, so we're making it difficult for. And I'm thinking, but he says, you know, we wanted them to leave, but you promoted them because he liked to pine and he went to the pub with them. And I'm thinking, but you promoted him twice, and yet you're telling me that I'm doing all the work and you're only upset because I've handed my notice in. I don't, and that's the bit I struggle with, because you could have promoted me, but you chose not to because I am. And they often say, well, you talk a lot and you're a bit quirky, right? Yes, I am, and I also hear the conversations they have in the pubs. So that's the bit that I struggle with, because we say we're inclusive, but then you're not truly, because when you're interviewing, you're not actually employing the right people for the job. You're employing who you'll get on with.
I experienced exactly the same thing, Becky, in an organisation I was in as well. I couldn't stand it any longer and I left. So I know it does happen. I'm not saying all men are nice really, any more than all women are nice. I mean, it takes everyone to allow all this to happen.
Does take everyone, and you know, there is a good side to this, Becky,
play along with it.
and that actually at least they're being straight with you.
Yeah,
Now.
That's true. Yeah, I'm gonna say, yeah, apparently I've never had so many compliments in the last couple of days, backhanded ones in some ways, but still compliments that, yeah, we saw what you did. We can't afford to lose you. I'm thinking, but you didn't, at no time did you actually say that to me when you was promoting the men above me. And I was like, you know.
Well, all you can do is give them some feedback, formal feedback, you know, that's what you can do. And you know, and come back at a later stage when you're on the rise in your next job and offer them some training sessions.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
that would be quite funny.
You don't need it. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, you know. You don't have to jump up and down and get angry. You can provide some very measured feedback and then come back and, based on your feedback, offer them some training sessions.
I might actually do that just because I think that would be interesting to see if they would respond and listen, or if they'd just be like, we don't need it. Yeah, I think I might do that.
Okay, well, are we okay to move on?
Yeah, sorry.
No, please don't say sorry. This was really interesting.
that's
And
good.
an important point, really important point. Anyway, we have covered everything here, you know, but we're talking now from the 2000s, where people start to really change in their thinking within the workplace. And frankly, technology has made that happen, really, because we all start to realize we're in a global situation and things change very quickly, and actually it becomes quite complex, our interactions and you know, and our relationships. So we now realize that leadership is quite complex, actually. And, you know, you need leaders who have some emotional intelligence. That's what I bang on about all the time. So, you know, these hierarchical views of leadership become less relevant. They actually can't function, frankly, because all the smart people will run circles around these leaders, and the leaders often won't know about it. So, you know, it's not functional. It's not even possible in this modern world. So, you know, there is a focus now on collective social process. Good. But that actually, and I think it's important that we say this now in terms of neurodivergence, okay, because this is about a neurodivergent leadership program. It's exactly at the same time that things start to change for the neurodivergent community as well. You know, we see a change in language. We see a change in how we are economically thought about, because suddenly they realize people in leadership roles are now neurodivergent people, okay, and coming out as saying they're neurodivergent people because they're really excellent in what they do. So they can't be ignored. And not only that, research is coming up with evidence that actually neurodivergent people contribute hugely to our economy. So that can't be ignored either by the politicians. So it becomes, you know, an important conversation to be had, because money speaks, doesn't it? You know, and we all pay our taxes. So it all contributes to cultural change, and it all contributes to that word that people are talking about now, which is intersectionality, where we are recognizing that there are challenges across the board for people. You know, we are made up of parts, and, you know, and depending on our parts depends on the challenges that we have. So this is all part and parcel of the conversation that is going on within society, within leadership, within policy, within research, with politicians. Okay, so I just need to put that into context. I'm not sure we've got time for this, but maybe you would like to briefly talk about how can leaders be flexible? And we can go, I can stop the share. Do you want to discuss this, or do you want me to just carry on with the slides? Would you like to discuss this?
I'm giving everybody else a chance because I feel I'm monopolising, so I'll let somebody else answer.
Actually, I don't mind, because I've written some notes, and just to keep me on point, it's really a bird's eye summary, and some of it is probably duplicate to what Catherine's already said, but in a different way. And inclusive leadership for neurodiverse people, I find that they're non-judgmental, not critical, but solution-based. They have a more holistic approach. Due to the many misunderstandings a neurodivergent person goes through in life, they can look at the bigger picture and have more insight. They are good at motivating themselves as well as others, and are good at making changes way before a disaster. They are good at planning their leadership styles to a high standard. They are good at reproducing or producing or creating something new, and they can adapt to different situations, complex situation planning in detail. And I find that they're very sensory, I can't say the word, with, you know, when they're leading, you can feel it, you can see it in that way. They know when not to lead, even when they are leaders, with the understanding many hands make light work. There is always a measured method, the right outcome, even when others cannot see it. The neurodiverse leader is or becoming resilient. Neurodivergent leader know how to simplify complex situation or finding shortcuts to complex situations. They usually wear many hats. A neurodiverse leader are very captivating and holds your attention. They know when info is either incorrect, incomplete, or false. Neurodiverse leaders usually don't wear titles to say this is who they are. That's just my observation. That's my input for this evening.
Fabulous. Anybody got anything to contribute to that or to say?
That was well put, Alicia.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Anybody else want to contribute to that? How can leaders be flexible? I mean, Alicia had, you know, really was very clear about how this can happen. Anybody else want to add?
I think it's go. Sorry, I was going.
I
Let
was
you
just,
go.
I was just going to say, I really agree with the sense that what you said about the sensory presence of someone, Alicia. Yeah, just real, really. Real.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jennifer, have you got anything to add? Jennifer?
Yes, but I don't know how to phrase it. So when you described all those attributes and things, in my mind, that does speak to kind of dyslexic characteristics. And I don't know how to tactfully say. I have had bosses that are definitely not dyslexic, probably neurodivergent, and they sometimes don't display those characteristics. Katherine, could you say that in a better way? But it might be one for a future session. Because I don't want to make this too narrow, but I think we can't make the general assumption about everybody, but people on this call, I think we share lots of those traits, especially the sort of empathy sensitive ones, big picture ones.
Okay, I'll just say that Alicia kind of made a leap there because she was talking about neurodivergent leaders, and actually what I was talking about was leaders per se, just generally. How can leaders be flexible? Because we are going to get on to the contributions of neurodivergent leaders, but you know, Alicia
it was a really great list, I thought, though. Yeah, it was nice to hear.
And you know, and of course there are elements of that list that are particular to a particular spectrum, and you are quite right, Jennifer, that there are some neurodivergent people who aren't like that, but they will contribute in a different way as a leader. And some neurodivergent people would find it actually really, really difficult to be really flexible, actually. So, you know, they would have their own way of responding, and that's when everybody else has to be flexible around them, because if, you know, as leaders, we are leaders to our strengths, and that's where the people around them who are leaders need to recognize the strengths of that leader. And we're going to come on to that in a minute, that actually inclusive leadership is about everybody being a leader, but actually adjusting to each other and recognizing our strengths. Does that answer?
It does. Thanks, Katherine. And I think it's a really interesting one for us to look at in future. Thank you.
Yeah, but I thought that's why neurodivergent, the name was put in place instead of saying dyslexic, because
yes, it is
to be inclusive. So that's why I made sure I said neurodivergent instead of actually pinpointing dyslexic person.
Yeah, I think what Jennifer is saying, that some of the attributes that you were listing are actually much more towards a particular,
Yeah,
dyslexia.
okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
Whereas if you were an autistic person, some of those attributes that you listed might become more difficult for you, but you have a strength in another place.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good to
But
know.
it's still it's good. It's almost like there's no one rule thing, but it's good to talk about them, and like Catherine said, sort of that balance thing.
Mm.
So yeah, I really liked hearing the list to think about it, and then it's an example, I guess. Yeah.
No, it's a
But
really excellent.
yeah, well, some of it is just giving it a voice, I
Yeah.
think, because sometimes when you don't hear, you may be thinking it, but to give it a voice, you get a different perspective.
Yeah, and this,
Exactly that. Yeah.
yeah, and that's what's happened to this. You've had a voice, and then other people have had voices along the way.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's what it's about, isn't it? It's
yeah.
about enabling voices.
So basically, you're talking a lot about empowering, like a good leader. Basically, well, the opposite, don't they? A good leader empowers everybody around them, and therefore everybody brings the better self, rather than like the old-fashioned, what they say back in like Victorian times, where the Lord and Master type thing that still happens in a lot of places, even back to this day, realistically, depending on what sort of structure they've got, where it comes from the top, and basically people aren't encouraged to question and be the better selves. Whereas a flexible leader would adapt. I see it more that they look at an individual or look at their team and actually truly appreciate that everybody's a little bit different, and they will flex the way that they manage that person or lead that person to accommodate that person's skill set. So let's say somebody is like super focused and has to do things in a certain way because that's how their brain works. Then you've got somebody else who maybe is not good in the morning but later in the evening because that's how they work, and they're slow but really functional. And the somebody else, let's say, I don't know, needs childcare or needs a wheelchair, and they adapt their leadership style to suit that individual, to make sure that they can bring their best person and everything, and still enable them to do their job. That's how I see it. I don't think it really happens, but I think a good leader would do all that if they was good.
Yeah,
and they were flexible.
And underpinning that is communications, isn't it?
Or to be created.
Yeah, that's right.
And a safe space, because I think people will only talk to their leaders or their bosses and stuff like that if they feel comfortable when there's not going to be judgment. The minute they feel there's going to be judgment or repercussions for saying something because the culture's not right, then that's what hampers people, because they're not empowered to be able to have that voice, I think. And that's, again, I would say, the level of the leader and the flexibility of a leader to bring that out in a person.
So that happens in this group, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because we all encourage each other to say more stuff, don't they? One person says it, somebody else chips in, and somebody else, because normally it's like there can be a sea of silence, and then all of a sudden once one person starts talking, you can't shut any of us up. So yeah.
I would say that happens to an extent in this group. Yes, I would say that. So, because you're talking about a culture of safety here. Yeah, psychological safety. And that's really important in inclusive leadership, that you have psychological safety. And actually, it's you all, at one with the values, the cultural values. Okay. Anybody else want to say anything before we move on? Dee, did you want to say anything? No? Okay. Right. So that was a really great conversation, actually, and thank you, everybody. So what do we have now? We have what we are talking about inclusive here. And, and I said a bit earlier, sort of cutting edge stuff, and I do think this, because we're putting inclusive with neurodivergent and intersectionality here. And I had to give a talk yesterday at 9 o'clock in the city to recruitment people, Crone and Corkhill, loads of money. But, you know, they were bang on the nail. They understood exactly what I was saying. And the conversation was really interesting. But what was interesting, there was an awful lot of young people in the audience who understood the language. Okay. And so, you know, inclusive practice is really important now in organizations, a coordination, a collective coordination of leadership throughout the organization. You know, Google are quite good at this, actually. You know, they're very good at including people and looking after their staff. So we have what's emerging as inclusive leadership. But interestingly, there is something called servant leadership, which emphasizes the importance of followers. You've got servant leaders seeking to support their team members and concerned about, you know, their welfare and serving people first. Okay, so here we have it, inclusive leadership. Anybody want to read that out?
Being an inclusive leadership, being an inclusive leader may require you to change your fundamental beliefs, challenge your preconceptions, and unlearn previous behavior.
Yeah. So it's about having an open mind and being self-aware. So we're going back to emotional intelligence, aren't we? And being self-aware and regulating ourselves. So neurodiversity and inclusive leadership. And you listen to what Alicia said earlier as well, and what you all said earlier, you know, and we talked about integrity and honesty, which comes with courage, it comes with commitment, cognizance of bias. It's about being aware of bias, being aware there's an agenda somewhere with somebody within the workforce, because that can't be tolerated. Okay, curiosity, to take risks sometimes and to be creative. Cultural intelligence, that's where intersectionality comes in, and, you know, recognizing that we all have an equal say. Collaboration, most importantly, humility, sorry, the weather's getting to me, empathy, vulnerability and resilience. Some of those words you've all said already. So, you know, this is important stuff that we should hang on to as we go through our training sessions, okay? We need to return to this every time we do a training session. You know, are we fulfilling this as we, you know, have our voice in these training sessions? So, great leadership as a network. And we've talked about this a lot in our meetups. We've talked about this loads. You know, the future is collaboration, networking, advocacy, mentoring. It's the real deal. Now, when I send you this, these slides later on today, do cut and paste this TED Talk, this YouTube TED Talk by, I think it's Jite Frederiksen. I think she's German. She's a German engineer. Okay. She's really good. She talks about, you know, the fact that it's a network. We're all leaders. This is not a hierarchy anymore. We've all got something to contribute. And she's really low key about how she delivers it, but it's really well said. So, you know, as part of this training today, do have a look at this YouTube film. Okay, so what have we covered today amongst our, you know, conversations about, you know, who we are, you know, where we are placed as women, because it's all women here tonight, as leaders in society. And I thought it was a really interesting conversation. You know, the authoritative leader is still there. We know that. We still come across them lots, as Becky has said. And I know that several of you will have come across authoritarian leaders, not just men, actually, women too.
Yeah, some women can be, they can be even worse. I've got to say, yeah, sometimes they can be really bad.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when they feel threatened.
Mm.
So, you know, it's still around. It's still around in how people are in the workplace. It's still around in training. You know, this big man theory, the transactional and the behavioral. But we are moving forward gradually, depending on what happens in society, to understand that, you know, it's situational. It's about the context in which we operate in. It's about inspiring people and making changes, to being inclusive and recognizing many different perspectives within our situations and with relationships, and the geopolitical and cultural place that we inhabit, to then, interestingly, almost full circle, to this servant, from authoritarian to servant, where it's recognized that, you know, to serve people is part of leadership, actually. You know, the Queen, I mean, I am not a monarchist, I have to say. I'm a bit of a Republican, but I do see the value of the monarchy. You know, and the Queen, who, you know, departed about a year ago or so, she would repeatedly say, I'm here to serve, servant, I serve.
God help us if you get someone else who's currently available to be the head of the state. I don't mean Prince Charles. I just mean, if you can imagine Sunak or even Keir Starmer in charge of the whole country, it'd be terrifying.
Well, yes, and I think, you know, there's that whole discussion about the Lords as well. You know, I actually, you know, again, I'm a bit of a Republican, you know, but I still see the value of the Lords, and you know, I do see the value of the monarchy as people who mediate. You know,
Yeah, I think they definitely have I think they definitely have a place as well. The fact they bring loads of money in, and I'm a bit like you. I'm not a royalist. I'm not an anti-royalist either. I think they've got a place. I think they do stuff, and I also think, because recently I got to go to the Inter House of Parliament. I was in the Lord bit as after I'd gone in the other bit. But what I did know, what I think with the House of Lords is, I think they've changed the rules now. I don't think it should be inherited by birthright, just because you inherited all this money and everything, therefore you're allowed to make a decision and allowed to have an opinion, when actually you may not know anything about it. Whereas I think people in the House of Lords, if they've come from industry with actual knowledge and experience, and they get in through that way, I think the House of Lords is a good idea for the check for the politicians. Because what I didn't realize till a few years ago, because I didn't know, but I hadn't really looked into it, the people that are politicians who, let's say, lead education or health or the rail or anything else, they're not experts in that. They've just been given it and know absolutely nothing about it. Whereas, what other job could you get what's paying you a lot of money that you could walk in and say, I've got no experience, I know nothing about it, but I'm going to be in charge of all these millions of pounds and decide where they go and sign stuff off? To me, that does not make sense. Just my personal opinion. It just doesn't
But
make sense.
I suppose at that kind of level, one would expect that they will do their research. They've got civil servants around them. They've got people who should be advising them and everything as well. I mean, I see what you mean, but at the same time, I think at that level, like, they should be able to learn and on the job and be competent and, you know, use lots of transferable skills to be able to do the job well. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I see it, maybe.
yeah, and I agree with you completely. You know, what we've entered into in the last decade is career politicians. You know, before that, you know, decades ago, people did something in their lives before they became MPs.
Yeah, that's it. They had a trade, so they understood the real world before you just became basically a politician, and you spend your whole life being a politician, which is all well and good. But if you don't understand the actual person and the society that you're there fighting for and reflecting, how can you truly lead if you don't know the people? If you're not on the ground? Is, again, not to bring out politics, but to me, I just think if you're going to be good with a leader or anything, and the best leaders that you see about this are the ones that deal with the factory floor. So, you know, they go to the factory floor and understand everything throughout, and therefore they understand their people. Whereas they're not understanding the people a lot of the time, because, like you said, they're a career politician.
Absolutely. And I think we are turning full circle again on this. because we are recognising this is what has happened. I mean, I think there's no doubt that Labour will get in next. And you have to say that Keir Starmer has had a life beforehand. You know, and let's not get too political, because there are things about Keir Starmer I really don't like. But, you know, I am a Labour voter and I will in the end vote Labour. But, you know, there's stuff about him that I don't like. But you have to say this, he has had a career before becoming a politician. Whereas, you know,
Rishi Sunak, whether you like him or not, which I don't, but he did too. I mean, that is the truth.
he did too, you know. And to be frank, you know, I have a bit of sympathy for Rishi Sunak actually, because I don't like the Tory party, that's for sure. But you know, there are some things about the Tory party that you've got to admire. They are the party that had female leaders.
And neither party has all the answers. And I think what Alicia said earlier about look inside and ask what's really true of yourself. Because I think we live in such a dualistic, one person's good, other person's not. It's so dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the Tory Labour, and I'm not trying to be heavily political because I was raised in a Labour family, but it's been really interesting being in a relationship with somebody whose family came from a different angle. And the truth is that there is a lot that Labour caused a huge amount of trouble, got us into an enormous amount of trouble, and people don't want to discuss that. They just want to hate the Tories. And I think there's so much dishonesty in what the whole picture is. It's not just Tory bad, Labour good. It's just bull, this stuff. And I think
you know,
It's not black and white, is it? Yeah.
No, it's
Yeah.
not, you know, and I completely agree with that, Rose, because, you know, I actually read up about Rishi Sunak, and he's actually quite a decent human being. You know, he was been in finance, he's made a lot of money, he's married well, but he's also, you know, set up charities, he's donated huge amounts of money to good causes. You know, he's done good, the man, you know, and he's just handed the poison chalice, really, on the back of Boris and Liz Truss, frankly.
He wanted it desperately as
He
well.
wanted
It's not
it,
like
he
he
wanted-
wasn't. He was just, oh, you know, okay, I'm sorry, I'll take it on, but I don't really want it. I'm sure he pretty much wanted it.
He wanted
Well,
it, but
also-
he'd probably like it in a better time, though, wouldn't he? I mean, because thing is, you might want it, but you knew what were coming straight after them two, didn't you? That was the thing. You know, but you wouldn't matter if you were fantastic or you were rubbish. You were never going to be doing it. You were never going to be highly regarded because of who you'd followed, because everybody remembers what they did.
Well, there's 2 points to this, and that's, and you know, you're right there. You know, he's our first brown prime minister, and that's a good point. Okay, and secondly, for him, he gets a lifetime pension, doesn't he?
I know. I could not believe that was a thing. I did not know that was a thing until the whole thing with Liz Truss, where she basically had done nothing, and she gets a lifetime pension.
He gets a lifetime pension.
I mean, that's just wrong, isn't it? There's no justification for anything like that. You know.
I'm just going to stop the recording now.